Across Australia, the ground began to dry out, shrink, and crack into large broken plates. In places where a little moisture was still left, countless large holes appeared close together. Grass was chewed down to the soil, and young plants did not have time to grow back. Then a massive iron fence appeared. It stretched longer than the country itself, built for one purpose only: to stop the rabbits before they crossed to the other side. But it was already too late. They slipped through. They dug under it. They squeezed through every possible gap. This is the story of the largest and most persistent ecological disaster in Australia, recognized around the world. At one point, their population was reduced by 90%. Rabbit carcasses were scattered across the grasslands, yet their numbers exploded again. For the first time, Australia had to appoint a coordinator just to manage rabbits. So what did this small rabbit, non-venomous, harmless-looking, and not even a predator do to destroy an entire continent? Let's begin right now. Australia is not like Europe, Africa, or the Americas. And even though it sits close to Asia, Australia's ecosystem developed in an almost completely different way. About 45 million years ago, this continent separated from other land masses. From that point on, almost everything here became different from the rest of the Earth. According to CSIRO, about 80 to 90% of Australia's native mammals are marsupials, such as kangaroos, wallabies, bandicoots, and bilbies. Here, the familiar groups you might expect are almost nowhere to be found. No native wild cattle, no deer, no rabbits, no goats, and no sheep. The plants are different too. Most of Australia is semi-arid, with rainfall in many regions reaching only about 10 to 20 inches per year. The soil is also poor in nutrients after millions of years of weathering. Plants grow slowly, fresh shoots are rare, and once the ecosystem is damaged, it takes a very long time to recover. At first, rabbits were not a problem. Rabbits had been in Australia since 1788, when the British arrived with the first fleet, but those were only domestic rabbits. Yes, they were still under human control. That lasted until 1859, when a man at Barwon Park in the state of Victoria released rabbits simply for recreational hunting. But these were no longer domestic rabbits. These were wild rabbits, capable of surviving, breeding, and adapting in the natural environment. Only 7 years later, by 1866, about 14,000 rabbits had already been hunted or trapped right in the original area. And that was only the visible part of the problem. According to the National Museum of Australia, within just 50 years, rabbits had spread across nearly the entire continent. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, rabbits had appeared in most major states, including Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, and Queensland. By 1950, according to CSIRO, the number of rabbits in Australia had reached about 600 million. They were considered one of the fastest invasions ever recorded for any mammal species anywhere in the world. Spread evenly, that number would have been equal to nearly one rabbit for every person on Earth at the time. Why did their population explode so quickly in just over 70 years? To understand that, you have to look deeper, because this was not caused by just one thing. It was a chain of causes. First, humans accidentally built an entire paradise for rabbits. And we are not exaggerating. As settlers expanded their farms, they cut down trees, cleared shrubs, and turned forests into grasslands for sheep and cattle. New fields, fresh grass after rain, agricultural crops, all of it created an ecological highway for rabbits to spread. Rabbits loved exactly what humans had created: short grass, low shrubs, soft soil for digging burrows, and feeding areas located right next to shelter. But a favorable environment was only half the story. The other half was their reproductive speed, which ranks among the fastest in the animal world. According to PestSmart and Australian agricultural agencies, rabbits are pregnant for only about 28 to 30 days. That is less than 1 month. A female rabbit can produce 5 litters or more each year, with each litter usually having 4 to 6 young. After that, the young rabbits need only about 3 more months before they can become pregnant themselves. More importantly, a female rabbit can mate again almost immediately after giving birth. The mother is not even stopped, and the young are already preparing to reproduce. Tasmania's Department of Natural Resources gives a very easy-to-understand example. Just one pair of rabbits can become more than 180 rabbits in about 18 months if conditions are favorable. In addition, across many parts of southern and southeastern Australia, winters are not extremely harsh, allowing rabbits to survive year-round. After every rainfall, fresh grass grows and that becomes the signal for rabbits to explode in reproduction. According to PestSmart, the rabbit breeding season depends directly on rainfall and the availability of nutrient-rich food. And we have not even talked about what they eat. They can graze on grass, eat plant shoots, bark, roots, seeds, and even agricultural crops and young native plants. On average, each rabbit eats about 3.5 to 17.5 ounces of vegetation per day. Do you remember how we said Australia did not have the same land predators as other continents? There were no lions, leopards, or bears, predators that would see rabbits as food. In Australia, there was no predator strong enough to control rabbit numbers. And do not think catching a rabbit is easy. It is not. Australia does have dingoes, eagles, snakes, and other predators. But none of them evolved specifically to deal with an animal that is small, flexible, able to slip through gaps in fences, and able to hide in low bushes. When chased, rabbits can run up to 25 to 31 miles per hour, and they need only a few seconds to disappear into a burrow. And when 600 million rabbits appeared across Australia, the consequences unfolded in layers clearly, and with each layer becoming worse than the last. The first layer was the collapse of vegetation. According to Australian invasive species management programs such as PestSmart, rabbits are a major threat to more than 300 endangered plant and animal species. Each rabbit eats about 3.5 to 17.5 ounces of vegetation per day. That may sound small, but imagine this. 1 million rabbits would eat about 300 to 500 tons of vegetation every day. And at their peak, Australia had hundreds of millions of them. Honestly, Australia's grasslands could never provide enough food for all of them in the long term. Rabbits do not just eat grass. They chew young shoots, bark, and roots, wiping out plants from the moment they begin to grow. The plant cover disappears, the soil is exposed, dries out quickly, and loses its ability to hold water. The second layer begins right after that: soil degradation and erosion. When there are no plant roots left to hold the soil together, rain washes away the topsoil, while wind blows away dust and organic matter. Areas that were once grasslands begin turning into bare ground. In some dry regions, records show that 50 to 80% of the vegetation can be lost. And do not forget, rabbits do not only eat, they also dig. A rabbit warren can have 10 to 50 entrances and reach depths of about 1.5 to 10 feet. Millions of warrens like that weaken the ground, cause it to collapse, and destroy its structure. This is when many areas begin shifting toward an almost desert-like state. The third layer is that native animals are pushed out. When grass and young plants disappear, species that depend on them, such as bilbies, bandicoots, and many small marsupials, lose both food and shelter. Rabbits also take over burrows, reproduce faster, and directly outcompete them. Species that cannot compete are pushed into poorer, less resource-rich areas or disappear altogether. Ground-nesting birds, reptiles, and insects are also hit by the chain reaction. And then comes the final layer, the one humans feel most directly: money. Rabbits do not just damage nature, they hit farmers directly in the wallet. According to Australia's Department of Agriculture and PestSmart, the damage rabbits cause to agriculture is estimated at about 197 to 217 million Australian dollars each year. In Victoria and Tasmania alone, damage to the cattle, sheep, and wool industries is about 30 million Australian dollars per year. The mechanism is very simple. Rabbits eat the same grass as sheep and cattle. When the grass is grazed down to nothing, farmers are forced to reduce their herds or buy feed. Rabbits also destroy wheat, vegetables, and fruit trees, especially young plants, meaning the damage does not stop with one growing season. It can last for many years afterward. Australia realized it was facing a real crisis. On August 31, 1887, the government of New South Wales offered a reward of 25,000 British pounds to anyone who could find an effective way to destroy the rabbits. According to analyses from the University of Melbourne and ABC, that amount would be equal to about 10 million Australian dollars today, an enormous sum in the 19th century. The damage caused by rabbits had clearly gone far beyond an agricultural nuisance. It had become a national problem. According to the Australian Academy of Science, as many as 1,456 proposals were submitted, from farmers to scientists. The crisis even attracted the attention of Louis Pasteur and the Pasteur Institute in Paris. Pasteur's nephew, Adrien Lohr, even traveled to Australia to conduct experiments directly, but the result was no one won the prize. By April 16, 1888, a royal commission was established to examine an extremely bold idea for that time, using infectious disease to kill rabbits. Later, this idea would help save Australia. But at that moment, without a guaranteed solution, people were forced to fight with the most basic methods. They shot rabbits, set traps, destroyed warrens, spread poison, hired workers, used hunting dogs, and even used ferrets to drive rabbits out of their burrows. The problem was scale. One farm might clear its own land, but rabbits from somewhere else would flood back in. One person could kill hundreds, but behind them were thousands more still breeding. Destroying warrens sounded more logical, because that was where rabbits reproduced. But each warren could have dozens of entrances, reach several yards deep, and if it was not destroyed completely, the rabbits only needed to dig again. In the 19th century, when machinery was still limited, destroying millions of warrens was almost impossible. Poison was easier to deploy, but it also had clear limits. It only affected the rabbits that ate the right bait at the right time in the right place. When direct control methods failed, humans tried a different approach, introducing more predators into the ecosystem. It sounded convincing. If there were too many rabbits, then release something that eats rabbits. And that is how the European red fox was brought to Australia around the 1850s, mainly around Melbourne, according to Victoria's Department of Agriculture. At first, foxes were released for recreational hunting, but only about 20 years later, they were already declared a pest species. Today, they have spread across more than 75% of Australia. Why? Because rabbits accidentally fed the foxes. Foxes are opportunistic predators. They eat almost anything that is easy to catch: rabbits, mice, birds, reptiles, eggs, insects, and even garbage. When rabbit numbers exploded, they created a steady source of protein. That helped foxes survive, reproduce, and spread faster, even into dry regions where they might have struggled to survive before. More importantly, foxes did not solve the rabbit problem. The issue still remained, because rabbits reproduced too quickly. They lived in deep burrows and were very good at hiding. From there, many native Australian mammals suffered. They had evolved in an environment without foxes. They were slower, less alert, and had no effective defense mechanisms against this new predator. The most vulnerable group included species weighing from about 1 ounce to 12 pounds, such as bilbies, bandicoots, betongs, and numbats. According to the Invasive Species Council, foxes contributed to the extinction of about 16 native mammal species, and they continue to threaten many others. Over the past 200 years, more than 30 native Australian mammal species have disappeared, with foxes and feral cats among the major causes, but Australia could not stop. It had to find the next solution. If they could not wipe out the rabbits, then they would block their path. And they actually did it. In Western Australia, the rabbit-proof fence system was built from 1901 to 1907. It was not one fence, but 3 separate fence lines. The main line, the number 1 fence, was about 1,140 miles long. At the time, it was the longest continuous fence in the world, running from the southern coast all the way up toward the northwest. Then came the number 2 fence, built in 1905, followed by the number 3 fence, bringing the total length of the entire system to about 2,023 miles. That is close to the distance from Madrid to Moscow, all to stop an animal that weighed only a few pounds. According to Western Australian heritage records, construction cost about £250 per kilometer, a huge amount of money at the time. The wire mesh stood about 42 inches high, with small openings, barbed wire, and fencing buried about 6 inches into the ground to stop rabbits from digging underneath. The posts were placed about 12 feet apart, and each post was at least 4 inches thick. Materials could not be transported by trucks the way they are today. They had to be hauled across remote wilderness by oxen, horses, mules, and camels. At the peak of construction, the project used about 120 workers, 350 camels, 210 horses, and 41 donkeys. But the problem was not the size. It was the timing. According to the State Library of Western Australia, as early as 1902, while the number 1 fence was still under construction, Rabbits had already been found west of the fence, the very side the fence was built to protect. That forced the government to build the number 2 fence only a few years later. The rabbits had moved faster than the project. The National Museum of Australia also confirms that many sections of the fence were built after rabbits had already crossed, meaning the entire strategy was one step too late. Even after the fence was completed, the battle was still not over. A system longer than Australia itself could not simply be built and left alone. It had to be patrolled constantly. A tiny opening, a torn section of mesh, a patch of eroded soil, or a fallen branch was enough for rabbits to squeeze through. The maintenance workers, known as boundary riders, first traveled by bicycle, then by camel, and later even by car to inspect the fence. But even cars had problems. Their tires were constantly punctured by the harsh terrain. To be fair, the rabbit-proof fence was not completely useless. It helped slow the spread in some areas and created a management boundary. But in its original goal, stopping rabbits from entering Western Australia, it failed. At this point, Australia was forced to enter a completely different stage, an unprecedented decision, using a virus to fight rabbits. In 1950, after years of testing, CSIRO released myxomatosis, a virus that causes severe disease in rabbits. By that time, the rabbit population had reached about 600 million. What happened next was almost unbelievable. According to ABC Science, in just about 2 years, the virus killed up to 500 million rabbits across Australia. In many areas, the death rate reached 90 to 99%. Fields that had once been packed with rabbits suddenly became silent, with rabbit carcasses scattered everywhere. For the first time, humans had a tool fast enough to keep up with the rabbits' reproductive speed, but that victory did not last. Only a few years later, its effectiveness began to decline. The reason was not simply that the virus immediately became weaker. It was because both the rabbits and the virus changed. The rabbits that survived were not random. They were individuals with a better ability to tolerate the disease. When they reproduced, that resistance spread through the population. At the same time, the virus also evolved. If it killed its host too quickly, it did not have enough time to spread to another rabbit. So, less deadly variants actually gained an advantage and spread more effectively. CSIRO describes this as coevolution between the host and the pathogen. As a result, by the late 1950s, the disease had become less severe and rabbit numbers began to rise again. Australia did not stop there. It launched a second strike. In 1995 and 1996, rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, also known as calicivirus, was tested and later spread beyond the trial area. An incident on Wardang Island allowed the virus to escape from quarantine. In less than 2 years, it had spread across southern Australia. A study in Queensland recorded a spread rate of at least 57 miles per month. In some dry regions, RHDV reduced rabbit populations by more than 95%. Once again, rabbit numbers were knocked down hard. But the story repeated itself. In humid coastal regions, where rainfall is higher and grass grows year-round, a more harmless virus called RCV-A1 appeared. It created cross-immunity, making rabbits less affected by RHDV. In other words, the natural virus system itself was weakening the weapon humans were using. By 2017, Australia continued with a new variant, RHDV1-K5, releasing it at more than 600 sites across the country. As of today, the number of rabbits in Australia is still around 200 million. That is still a huge number, but we all have to admit that it has gone down. And more importantly, Australia really has had places where rabbits were completely eliminated at least once. Macquarie Island, a sub-Antarctic island located between Australia and Antarctica, became a kind of natural laboratory for a completely different strategy. Because it is an isolated island, if rabbits and other invasive species could be wiped out completely, they would be almost unable to return. According to Australia's Department of the Environment, at least 9 bird species on the island were directly threatened. By around the 2000s, the ecosystem there was described as fighting for survival. So the Australian and Tasmanian governments decided to do something they could not do on the mainland: total eradication. The Macquarie Island Pest Eradication Project began in 2007 with a cost of about 24 million Australian dollars. The strategy was very clear: not isolated attacks, but a full-scale operation. Helicopters dropped poison bait across the entire island. combined with professional hunting teams and dogs to track down the last remaining animals. More importantly, they did not only target rabbits, they removed rats and mice at the same time to avoid another cycle of invasion. Winter was chosen as the main period for the operation because when natural food is scarce, animals are more likely to eat the bait. The result came in April 2014. Macquarie Island became the largest island in the world, confirmed to have eliminated 3 invasive mammal species at the same time. But the most surprising part was the speed of recovery. Just 1 year after the last rabbit was removed in 2011, signs of revival appeared much faster than the original 10-year prediction. By 2024, scientists described the island as a completely transformed landscape. Grass grew back, the soil became more stable, birds returned, and not only on the island. On the mainland, when rabbit numbers dropped sharply because of viruses such as myxomatosis and RHDV, ecosystems also responded clearly. Some studies recorded that the ranges of species such as the dusky hopping mouse and the plains rat increased by about 241 to 365%, while the crest-tailed mulgara expanded its range by up to 70 times. In conservation areas such as Bulkamata, more than 7,400 rabbit warrens were mapped and about 6,800 were destroyed, greatly reducing reproductive pressure. This shows one very important thing. When the pressure from rabbits disappears, nature can recover faster than we think. So, what will the future look like? Can humans truly control rabbits? Or will this always be a never-ending battle? With new technologies such as next-generation viruses or gene drives, there's more hope than before. But as history has shown, every solution comes with risks, and nature always reacts in ways no one can fully predict. What do you think? If it were up to you, would you choose total eradication? Or would you try to find a way to live alongside them? Leave your thoughts below. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to discover more real stories that sound almost impossible to believe.